Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion, continuing now, January the 11th, 2016. First stop on today's tour, let's look at the SOI, the Southern Oscillation Index. Pretty negative as of late. The daily number minus 21, and even the 90-day average down to minus 11. Still about half of what it was in October. We had a heck of a rebound in November, and just a little bit more negative than we saw in December. I think this will really start to change as we get into February, maybe even beforehand. This last negative bout, probably one of the last that we will see, where it got down to like minus 38, I think, in one of the dailies. And this will start to rebound, and that will mean that the pressure pattern across the tropical Pacific should begin to change and foster in more of an easterly wind surge across this area, as opposed to this westerly wind burst pattern that we've had as of late that generated a tropical cyclone out here well to the southwest of Hawaii. P-A-L-I, how do you say that? Pali, something. P-A-L-I, tropical cyclone, still out there actually, and this very warm water in the El Nino region, partly responsible for generating that. But I think it's going to change because look, the subsurface coolness is really starting to expand. I mean, look at this huge area of subsurface cold water pinching off this area. You remember how big this warm blob used to be? More like that, you know. It was very large, and the anomalies stretched out farther to the west here. Everything's just starting to shrink away. The warm blob that people talked about so much last year. Not going to hear too much about the cold blob until it's responsible, at least indirectly connected to maybe having more hurricanes next season in the Atlantic. It'll get blamed on the coming La Nina pattern, and that's probably not too far-fetched because check out some of these cold anomalies in here. Let's see, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shades of blue, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius below average. Yeah, so you can really have a lot of screaming and hollering when it's going to be 5 degrees Celsius above average. But what about when it's 5 degrees Celsius below average? Yeah, at least I'm pointing it out to you. Hey, it's there. It's starting to erode away this El Nino, and we'll see the different INSO regions start to respond. It's cooling off a little bit more here in the far eastern Pacific, and then the tropical Pacific as a whole starting to shed some of that heat because there's not any big reinforcing shot. You don't have another one of these coming in from over here, gradually making its way over to the east with sustained westerly wind bursts, creating what we call downwelling Kelvin waves, which is just a fancy way of saying that the pressure pattern that created this El Nino is starting to change, and this cold water is going to become more prominent, and we'll see the demise of the strong El Nino of 2015 and 16 happen fairly quickly. Now, the Institute for International Research Institute, I think that's what it's called, the IRI, Climate Prediction Center, latest forecast plumes. I was hoping they would come out today, but they haven't, so we'll have to wait until next Monday to take a look at that. And I suspect that we'll see a continuation of the prediction of a very rapid decline in this warm water. I mean, look, we have a good deal of the western part of the Pacific here from almost the date line. There's 180 degrees there. It's a pretty good straight line. So just a small chunk of that to the west of the date line, still above normal. And if we look at where that is on the INSO regions, there's the date line right there. So most of the INSO 4 area in here is now at neutral, right in here. This is this area. And then not far below the surface, cold water looms. So going back and looking at this chart, this area here starting to cool, and that'll eventually get over to the main Nino 3.4 area, as it's called, and we'll start to send it off into the sunset, so to speak. In the meantime, in the Atlantic Basin, some interesting things going on. Very warm Atlantic waters here, and yes, I probably should point that out while I'm on the anomalies map here. And by the way, you can see there's the little bit of the lessening of the heat in the eastern tropical Pacific, and then that ENSO 4 region extends out here, even off the map, starting to cool as well. But in the Atlantic basin, very, very warm compared to average in the western Atlantic, and even a good deal of the main tropical development region, the eastern part of the MDR, as we call it, running above normal. But this area here, all this warm water relative to average, has created this interesting feature, a sort of hybrid system. A front came through. There was enough focus and convergence and energy down here near the Bahamas that a gale center, or ocean storm as I like to call it, formed and moved past Bermuda and has now found itself out here in the open subtropical Atlantic, where water temperatures are not warm enough for deep tropical convection to really take hold and allow this thing to shed this frontal boundary that's got still attached to it like an umbilical cord. It may become closer to a subtropical storm where the winds are still spread out over a fairly large area, but it really has to lose that comma shape. This is a visible satellite animation. It's got to lose this front right here. That's a real indicator that it's still more of an extratropical storm than subtropical. You've got this area here where the center is, and it's trying to curl up and separate itself, but it has a ways to go. So we'll see what happens with that. It could still do it, but time's going to run out, and it'll eventually get on out into the North Atlantic again. We'll see. It might become subtropical storm Alex. That's the first name on this year's list, by the way, and it would be used. We wouldn't continue from 2015. It's 2016, and so if anything forms, tropical or subtropical, it'll get the first name on the list. And see, here's another frontal boundary draped down all the way into the Caribbean, but lots of upper level winds coming out, very dry air, and not the same setup that created this interesting little storm. Now, for lower 48 weather, pretty tranquil start to the week, not much going on, pretty cold compared to where it has been in the eastern part of the country. Still lots of flooding issues along the Mississippi Valley, of course, from the heavy rain that's been happening in that region. And otherwise, though, except for lake effect snow, and some of it very heavy here, isolated in just a small part of portions of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, the rest of the country is fairly tranquil in terms of widespread, disruptive, severe winter weather or storminess of any nature. And if we look through the GFS real quick, luckily they've reformatted it so it doesn't do that flashing, pulsing stuff that it used to do. This is the full 2 weeks out, and we can draw on here while it's happening as well. I really like this. Notice this is the east coast of the U.S. No major winter storms, a few smaller kind of wannabe nor'easters try to take shape, and then they get shunted off into the Atlantic. And the 0 degree Celsius line right here does not dip down into the Florida citrus groves yet. So really no severe weather for cold purposes. No major winter storms anywhere in the near term. Occasionally in the long term, 8, 9, 10 plus days out, you'll see the GFS try to create some kind of a mega storm right off the Carolinas or up off of New England. But as we should know by now, as with hurricanes, when they're that far out in time, 7, 8, 9, 10 days plus, you really can't put much stock into it. You got to look at the ensemble members, the other models, the Euro, for example, and if they all start to sing the same tune, especially that far out, then you can get suspicious at least, but certainly not concerned. Weather models are good, but they're not that good. I usually like to look at 5 days or less, and even that, as we saw with Joaquin last September into early October, you can sometimes get hammered from one model, the Euro, beating the GFS handily, because the American models thought Joaquin was coming into the mid-Atlantic states, and the Euro was the outlier, and it turned out to be right. So we all remember that. Anyway, that's it for today and for the week. Pretty calm week ahead for the most part, like I said, as we get towards the middle and latter part of the month. And into February, you would figure that the pattern will change, and very cold air combined with the southern stream branch of the jet stream coming out of the subtropics might give us some interesting storm systems, but at least for the next few days, none to be found, at least on a widespread basis. All right, have a good rest of your Monday. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. As always, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next week.